Bring her to me. 3 words. That was all it took to silence Camelot Keep. Alpha King Gregory Thor didn't need to raise his voice from a throne built out of obsidian and the bones of alphas who'd once believed they could take his crown. Pale gold hair spilled over broad shoulders. Silver eyes swept the guards kneeling before him, and not one of them dared look up. I don't care what condition she's dragged in. I don't care if she's a spy sent by a rival pack, a curse someone thought clever to send my way, or barely breathing by the time you reach the gates. Nobody moved. Bring her to me. For 3 weeks, the whispers had traveled faster than any wolf could run. An Omega, alone, unmated, unclaimed, had crossed the Hell Forest, land that swallowed lone wolves whole and never gave them back. She'd slipped through scent wards older than Gregory's crown, without a single guard catching wind of her, until she was already standing on his border. Camelot was not a kingdom that forgave trespassers. It never had to. Every pack within 3 days' run knew better than to test its borders. Until now. Some said Alpha Magnus of Ashwood had sent her to spy. Some said she carried a curse dressed in skin. Some said the neighboring kingdoms had finally grown bold enough to test him. Gregory intended to find out himself. Captain Rowan lingered at the base of the throne, jaw tight enough to crack. Your Majesty, if she's already hurt, dragging her through the gates could... Gregory's eyes cut to him. The rest of the sentence died in Rowan's throat. You have your orders, Captain. Rowan bowed low. It will be done, my king. The guards scattered, eager to be anywhere else. Gregory sank back against cold stone and told himself the tightness climbing his chest was irritation. A breach of his borders. Nothing more. 2 centuries on this throne. And nothing. No war, no assassination attempt, no political bride paraded before him by desperate lords, had ever made his wolf claw at the inside of his ribs like this. He called it anger. He was wrong. They brought her in at dusk, when the dying light through the high windows turned the hall the color of old blood. By then the court had already gathered. Elders wrapped in furs they hadn't earned, warriors who lived for war stories, nobles who'd come only for the spectacle, already placing quiet bets on what she was. They expected an execution. Every one of them had decided what she must be before they'd even seen her face. The doors groaned open. 2 guards dragged something barely standing between them. Her bare feet scraped across polished stone. What remained of her dress hung in shreds, dark with blood both old and fresh. One eye was swollen shut. Claw marks striped her shoulders, raw and unhealed. Bruises bloomed across skin so pale it looked bloodless already. The hall went utterly, completely silent. Gregory rose without deciding to. Then the scent reached him. Wild lavender, rain, pine after a storm breaks open. His wolf didn't growl. It roared, loud enough that Gregory staggered back against his own throne, like something had struck him in the chest. Mate, before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button, and tell me which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now let's dive in. 200 years he'd ruled, buried kings who'd called him brother, refused 100 political marriages without a second thought, felt nothing, for anyone, for 2 centuries. Until this. Her knees buckled. She hit the floor before anyone could catch her. Someone had done this to her. Someone had put their hands on what belonged to him before Gregory had even known she existed, and something in his chest that had stayed quiet for 200 years, finally woke up furious. The air itself seemed to thicken. Windows cracked, corner to corner. Torches guttered out one by one, as if the room itself flinched away from him. Every wolf present dropped to a knee without being told to. Who? His voice came out barely above a whisper, worse than any shout. Who did this to her? Rowan swallowed hard. We found her past the eastern border, my king. A rogue alpha and 4 of his men had claimed that stretch of land, and her, apparently, along with it. Gregory's claws tore straight through the armrest. Where are they now? In the cells, Your Majesty. No, he was already descending the steps, and every step landed like thunder. Execution Ridge. Tonight. Rowan's eyes went wide. Sire, That's reserved for traitors. He put his hands on my mate. The word hit the hall harder than any threat he'd ever made. Mate. A ripple of disbelief ran through the gathered nobles. The Alpha King, mated, and to an Omega, dragged in half dead. Gregory didn't wait for the shock to settle over the room. He crossed the floor and dropped to his knees beside her, and for the first time in longer than most of that court had been alive, the Alpha King's face held no fury in it at all. Only her. He brushed matted hair back from her cheek. Her skin was ice under his fingers. "What's your name?" he asked, quiet enough that only she could hear it. Her lips barely moved. "Rebecca." The name settled into him like a second heartbeat. Her one open eye found his, and Gregory braced himself for fear. He found something far worse. She looked at him like a girl who had already made peace with dying and was almost disappointed to still be breathing. Gregory gathered her into his arms before she could collapse again, rose to his full height, and turned for the doors without a single word to anyone in that room. No one in Camelot Keep had ever seen the Alpha King carry anything he didn't intend to destroy. Now he carried her, like she was the last fragile thing left in his kingdom worth saving. The court parted around him in stunned silence. He carried her through corridors that had never once felt his footsteps slow. Servants pressed themselves flat against the walls, eyes down, not one of them brave enough to ask why the Alpha King's hands were shaking. Word would reach every corner of Camelot before midnight. The king had found his mate, and she'd been found broken. He didn't care what they whispered. He shouldered open the doors to his private chambers and laid her across his own bed, like she might shatter under any less care than that. For a long moment, he simply knelt there, one hand still curled loosely around hers, and let himself feel something he hadn't allowed in 200 years. Fear, not for himself. He'd stopped fearing for himself before most of this court was even born. For her. Outside, 5 rogue wolves were already being dragged toward Execution Ridge, screaming a king's name they would learn, far too late, to fear properly. Inside, behind doors that never closed on anyone but him, Gregory Thor knelt beside a stranger he'd known for less than an hour and made a silent promise. She would live, whatever it cost him. Warmth reached her before anything else did. Rebecca surfaced slowly, like climbing out of dark water. The first thing she noticed wasn't the unfamiliar ceiling or the size of the bed swallowing her small frame. It was the absence of pain. No throbbing in her ribs, no raw fire across her shoulders where claws had torn her open. She lifted a trembling hand and touched her own face. The swelling was gone. Both eyes opened without resistance. That wasn't possible. She sat up too fast, gasping, and her fingers went to her collarbone, her arms, searching for wounds that should have taken weeks to close. Instead, she found smooth, unbroken skin. Not even a scar. Easy. A low voice, close by. Rebecca's head snapped toward it. Gregory sat in a chair beside the bed, forearms braced on his knees, watching her the way a man watches something he's terrified will vanish if he blinks. "What did you do to me?" Her voice cracked. "What are you?" "You're safe." That's not an answer. Something almost like a smile touched his mouth, gone as fast as it came. "You were dying. I gave you my blood. Alpha blood heals. Faster and deeper than any medicine your body has known. That's all it did. Nothing more." She stared at her own hands like they belonged to someone else. That shouldn't be possible. Very little about last night was possible. His silver eyes didn't leave her face. And yet, Rebecca pulled the blanket tighter around herself, some old instinct telling her to make herself smaller, harder to hit. Gregory noticed. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger. Something closer to grief. "You said a name last night," he said quietly. "Ethan." Her breath caught. "My brother." The words came out before she could stop them, cracked open by exhaustion and the strange, terrifying safety of this room. "He's 12. He has moon rot. It eats wolves from the inside, slow, and there's no cure unless you catch it early with proper medicine. Our Alpha." Her jaw tightened. "Magnus decided Ethan wasn't worth the cost. Said Omega blood wasn't worth wasting silver root on. So, you went looking for a cure yourself." "I went looking for you." She laughed, hollow and humorless. They say the Alpha King grants impossible wishes if you're desperate enough to ask. I thought if I offered you something, my life, my service, anything, you'd save him instead. You crossed Hell Forest planning to die there. It wasn't a question. Rebecca didn't answer it like one either. She just looked away. Gregory was quiet for a long moment. There's something you need to know, he said finally. Last night, when they brought you before my throne, my wolf reacted to you. Not fear, not curiosity. He leaned forward. Recognition. I don't understand. You're my mate, Rebecca. The words landed like a slap. She scrambled back against the headboard, putting distance between them that the room barely allowed. No, I know how it sounds. I'm an Omega from a pack that couldn't afford to save a dying child. You're the Alpha King of Camelot. Her voice shook. This isn't a story where that happens to someone like me. It happened anyway. I don't want it. The words tore out of her raw. I don't want to be owned by anyone ever again. Not by Magnus, not by fate, not by you. Gregory didn't move closer. If anything, he sat back, giving her more room, not less. Then I won't claim you, he said simply. The bond doesn't complete without both. I won't force what isn't given freely. Not to you. Not after everything already taken from you without your consent. Rebecca searched his face for the lie. She didn't find one. Then what happens now? A bargain. He held her gaze steadily. Stay in Camelot 3 months. In that time, my healer rides for your brother tonight. Ethan is cured before the sun sets on this. Not as payment, not as leverage. Because no child should die for his sister's blood status. And after 3 months, you choose. Stay as my mate of your own will. Or leave, and I will personally see you and your brother settled somewhere safe, under my protection, for as long as you need it. Why would you do that? Just let me walk away from something you clearly want. Because I've watched what happens to Omegas who are given no choices. His voice roughened. I won't be one more person who decides your life for you. Rebecca's throat tightened. She'd spent 3 weeks certain she was walking toward her own execution. She hadn't planned for kindness. She didn't know what to do with it. Swear it, she said finally. A blood oath. Not just words. Something like respect passed over Gregory's face. He drew a small blade from his belt without hesitation, drawing a shallow line across his palm. He offered it to her, and when she hesitated, he simply waited, patient, unhurried, letting the choice stay entirely hers. She took the blade. Their blood mingled between joined palms, and the air in the room shifted, some ancient magic settling into place like a held breath finally released. 3 months, Gregory said quietly. Then you choose. 3 months, Rebecca echoed. He rose immediately, calling for Elder Celine before the oath had fully cooled between them, dispatching her with orders to ride through the night if she had to. Ethan Ashwood was not to suffer another sunrise sick. Rebecca watched him go, one hand pressed to the closing wound on her palm, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself in years. The smallest, most fragile flicker of hope. Days folded into weeks. Her body had healed within days, thanks to Gregory's blood. Her guardedness took longer. She flinched less by the 2nd week. By the 3rd, she stopped waking with her back pressed to the wall, fists ready for a blow that never came. She started walking Camelot Keep on her own, testing the edges of a cage she still half expected to find. She never found one. Warriors trained in the lower courtyard at dawn, and she watched from a shadowed archway, waiting for cruelty. She found discipline instead, commanders correcting young wolves with patience, not fists. An older guard steadying a trembling recruit's stance instead of mocking him in front of the others. Servants moved through the halls without flinching at footsteps behind them. They met her eyes when she passed. Nobody in Ashwood Pack had ever looked an Omega in the eye without contempt behind it. She witnessed Gregory settle a dispute between 2 of his own warriors over stolen grazing land, listening fully to both sides before ruling, refusing to let rank decide the outcome. The wolf who lost grumbled, but bowed anyway, because even he couldn't call the verdict unfair. Days later, petitioners came from a border pack too small to have a name she recognized. their alpha dead, without an heir, strong enough to hold the territory. Rival packs already circled. Camelot will hold your borders until your pack stabilizes, Gregory said, without hesitation, without demanding payment. No pack under my protection starves, while stronger wolves fight over their bones. The petitioners wept at his feet. Gregory looked uncomfortable with their gratitude, waving them up before they could finish bowing. This was not the monster the rumors had built. That evening, as most evenings now, Rebecca found herself in his study, instead of her own chambers. She told herself, it was only because the fire burned hotter there. Your captain still doesn't trust me, she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Rowan doesn't trust anyone quickly. It's why he's still alive. Gregory didn't look up from the reports in front of him. He'll come around. You didn't grow up expecting to inherit a throne like this, did you? That made him pause. No. He set the papers down. I was the second son. My brother was meant to rule. I was meant to fight his wars. Something flickered across his face. Old grief, worn smooth by centuries. He died before he ever sat on this throne. I inherited a crown I never asked for, and a kingdom that expected me to be as ruthless as the wars that put me here. Is that why everyone fears you? Fear keeps borders quiet. Respect keeps them loyal. He met her eyes. I learned early, which one lasts longer. Sounds lonely. It is. He said it simply, without self-pity, like a fact he'd made peace with decades ago. 200 years is a long time to rule alone. Rebecca thought of her own loneliness. Years of being the daughter, then the sister, who mattered only for what she could give away. She understood something in him she hadn't expected to. What was your childhood like? Gregory asked, before Magnus. Warm, for a while. My mother sang badly and loudly, and my father let her anyway. Then she died, and my father not long after, and Magnus decided Omegas were worth exactly as much as we could produce. She stared at the fire instead of him. Ethan was the only thing I had left worth protecting. You still do. Something in his voice made her look up. He wasn't looking at her like a king inspecting a bargain he'd struck. He was looking at her like she mattered, entirely apart from any bond or blood oath between them. Rebecca's chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with old wounds. She noticed, more each evening, the careful distance he kept. How he never sat too close, never reached for her without invitation. Even when his eyes betrayed exactly how much restraint that cost him. She noticed the way his jaw tightened when a young alpha lord lingered too long over her hand at dinner, though Gregory said nothing, did nothing, let her handle it herself. She wondered, some nights, what it would take to close the distance he was so careful to leave between them. She told herself it didn't matter. 3 months. That was the agreement. Nothing more. It was nearly a month into her stay when elder Celine returned, travel-worn and smiling, a folded letter in her weathered hands. Your brother, Celine said, offering it to Rebecca. Completely healed. Moon rot cleared from his blood entirely. No trace remains. He's already causing trouble in the healer's wing, eating everything in sight and demanding to know when his sister is bringing him a wolf of his own. Rebecca's hands shook as she unfolded the letter. Ethan's handwriting, messy and rushed and unmistakably alive, filled the page. I'm not dying anymore. Are you a queen yet? Can I have a sword? She read it twice before the tears came, and once they started, they didn't stop. Gregory rose without a word and simply stood beside her chair, steady and present, not touching her, not needing to. She turned her face into his sleeve instead, and for the first time since Hell Forest, Rebecca Ashwood wept from something other than grief. Gratitude had a taste, she realized. It tasted like hope she hadn't let herself feel in years. Not everyone at Camelot celebrated Ethan's letter. Rebecca noticed it first in small things. Conversations that stopped when she entered a room. Nobles who bowed a fraction too shallow, a fraction too slow. Whispers that died the moment she turned toward them. She told herself it was nothing. 3 weeks ago she'd been dragged in half dead. She could survive a few cold stares. She was wrong about how far it went. She heard them before she saw them. 2 noble alphas lingering near the west gallery. Voices pitched low, but not low enough. An Omega, from a starving pack, wearing the king's favor like she earned it, one of them said. a sneer curling through his words. 200 years he's ruled without a mate, and fate hands him her? Fate or desperation, the other muttered. She'll wear a crown before she's spent a season here. Mark me, she won't wear anything if the council has its way. Laughter, quiet and cruel. Rebecca stood frozen in the shadow of the archway, old instincts screaming at her to disappear before they noticed her. She'd spent her whole life shrinking from voices like these. She made herself walk past them instead, chin level, eyes forward, and said nothing at all. But something in her chest had gone cold and hard by the time she reached her chambers. The attempt came 2 nights later. At a formal dinner, Gregory had insisted she attend at his side. She lifted the wine to her lips, and Gregory's hand closed around her wrist, so fast the goblet nearly shattered against the table. Don't. His voice had dropped into something low and dangerous. Nothing like the man who'd read letters over her shoulder that morning. His nostrils flared once, sharp. Gregory? Wolfsbane. The word came out through bared teeth. Enough to stop an alpha's heart. For you, it would have been instant. The hall went silent around them. Rebecca stared at the wine, her stomach turning to ice. Gregory rose from the table in one motion, and the temperature of the room seemed to drop with him. Someone at my table poisoned my mate, he said, and his voice carried to every corner of the hall without him raising it at all. Whoever did this will answer for it tonight. Guards moved instantly, sealing every exit. Nobles who'd been laughing an hour before went pale and silent. Later, alone in his chambers, Gregory's control had frayed to almost nothing. His claws had extended without him noticing, gouging thin lines into the wood of his desk. I want the kitchen staff questioned. All of them, tonight. His golden eyes burned through the dim room. Anyone who hesitates to answer dies where they stand. Gregory, stop. They tried to kill you. And if you execute innocent servants because they were too frightened to speak fast enough, you'll be exactly the monster they already whisper about. Rebecca crossed to him, steady despite the tremor still working through her hands. You told me once that fear keeps borders quiet, but respect keeps them loyal. This isn't respect. This is panic. You could have died. I didn't. She placed a hand over his, feeling the claws still extended beneath her palm. Find who did this. Prove it. Then you can be as merciless as you like, but not before. For a long moment, Gregory said nothing. She watched the fury in his eyes war with something else, something that had been growing quieter and more careful with her for weeks now. Slowly, his claws retracted. You ask too much mercy of a king who has none left to spare. I ask exactly as much as you have left to give. I've seen it. You give it to broken packs and grumbling warriors, and children who aren't even yours. She held his gaze. Give it to whoever did this too. Until you know for certain. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not surrender, but a kind of wonder, like he was seeing something in himself he hadn't known was still there. No executions, he said finally. Rough. Not tonight. Rowan investigates first, quietly. It wasn't nothing. From a man who'd sentenced 5 rogues to Execution Ridge without a second thought, it was almost everything. Rowan worked through the night. By dawn, he stood in Gregory's study, with a length of dark cloth in his gloved hand. The wolfsbane didn't come from the kitchens, he said grimly. It came from a private stock, sealed with a council signet. Gregory went very still. Whose? That's the trouble, my king. Rowan's jaw tightened. The wax was scraped before it could fully identify the seal. Deliberately. Someone covered their tracks well enough that it could belong to any of 6 council members. Rebecca felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her. Not a servant. Not a jealous noble acting alone. Someone inside Gregory's own council. Someone who sat at his side, advised his decisions, and had access close enough to poison a king's mate without anyone questioning their presence in the kitchens at all. Gregory's eyes met hers across the room, and for the first time since Hell Forest, Rebecca saw real fear behind them. Not for himself, for her. Security doubled within the hour. Guards were posted outside Rebecca's door. Food was tasted before it reached her table, and Rowan moved through the castle like a man hunting a ghost he couldn't yet name. Gregory grew quieter as the days passed. Rebecca noticed it the way she'd learned to notice everything about him. The tightness in his jaw during council meetings, the long silences over dinner, the way his eyes lingered on her a beat too long, like he was memorizing her in case something took her from him. That evening, she found him alone in his study, staring into a fire he wasn't really watching. "You've been somewhere else all day," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "Have I?" "You have." She waited. When he didn't answer, she tried again, softer. "Talk to me." For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't. Then something in him seemed to give way. "I fought in the reddening wars," he said quietly. "Before I ever wore a crown. My brother led armies. I followed his orders, and later, when he was gone, I gave the orders myself." His hands tightened on the armrests. "There was a village on the border of Thornwake. Neutral territory. My scouts swore rebels were hiding there, using the villagers as cover. What happened? I burned it." His voice had gone flat, hollowed out by something old and unhealed. "Rebels, yes, but children too. Mothers, wolves who'd never held a weapon in their lives. I told myself it was necessary. War makes men very good at telling themselves things." He finally looked at her. "I have carried that village for 180 years, Rebecca. I know exactly what I am beneath the throne and the title. That's why I never sought a mate. What kind of man asks someone to love a monster who did that? You were a soldier, following orders in a war you didn't start. I gave the order myself. Don't soften it for me." "I'm not." She leaned forward, holding his gaze even as he tried to look away. "I've seen what you actually do with power now, Gregory. I've watched you defend packs too weak to defend themselves. I've watched you listen to a warrior you could crush without lifting a claw, because being right mattered more to you than being obeyed. That man burned a village a lifetime ago. He isn't the only thing you've built since. Guilt doesn't simply wash away because I've grown kinder with age." "No, but it doesn't mean you don't deserve anything good either." Her voice caught, rawer than she intended. "I spent years believing I only mattered for what I could sacrifice. You're telling me you only matter for the worst thing you ever did. We're both wrong, I think." Gregory stared at her, like she'd said something he hadn't let himself consider in a very long time. "People can become better than the worst thing they've done," she said. "I have to believe that. Or none of this. Ethan healed. Me standing here instead of dead in Hell Forest. None of it means anything." The distance between their chairs had somehow disappeared. Gregory reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face with a gentleness that didn't match anything the rumors had ever said about him. "Rebecca, I know," she breathed. Neither of them moved away. His hand slid to her jaw. Her breath caught, and for one suspended second the entire weight of the castle, the poison, the council, the war he'd confessed, all of it fell away to nothing but the small space left between their mouths. A sharp knock shattered it entirely. "My king," Rowan's voice, urgent through the door. "You're needed." "Now!" Gregory closed his eyes briefly, some private curse passing behind them, before he rose and put the careful distance back between them, like it had never dissolved at all. 2 days' ride south, in the great hall of Ashwood Pack, Alpha Magnus received the news with a goblet halfway to his lips. "Say that again." "The Ashwood girl." His informant kept his eyes on the floor. "Alive. Taken in by the Alpha King himself. My source in Camelot says the girl is his mate." Magnus set the goblet down slowly. For 3 weeks, he'd assumed Rebecca dead in Hell Forest. One more Omega, who'd outlived her usefulness to him. He'd felt nothing at the thought. Less than nothing. Now something entirely different moved through him. The Alpha King of Camelot, untouchable for 2 centuries, feared by every pack from here to the eastern coast, had bound himself to an Omega from his pack. A girl who technically still belonged to Ashwood by blood and pack law, whatever the king believed. Magnus smiled slowly, and it was not a kind expression. "Send word to Alpha Corvin and Lord Barrick." He rose from his seat, already reaching for parchment. "Tell them I have something Camelot cannot afford to lose. Opportunity." Dressed as an Omega girl he'd once called worthless. By midnight, 3 ravens had already left Ashwood territory, carrying invitations no ambitious Alpha would refuse. The messenger arrived at midday, demanding an audience before the full court. Gregory allowed it. more out of curiosity than courtesy. He should have refused. The wolf wore ashwood colours and unrolled a parchment scroll with the theatrical care of a man who'd rehearsed this moment. From Alpha Magnus of Ashwood Pack to Alpha King Gregory Thor of Camelot. His voice rang out, pitched to carry. It has come to Alpha Magnus's attention that an Omega of Ashwood blood, sworn to her birth pack by law, older than this throne, has been unlawfully taken and held within these walls. Murmurs rippled through the gathered nobles. Alpha Magnus demands her immediate return and formally accuses King Gregory Thor of kidnapping a pack Omega against the treaties governing all packs under the Great Accord. Rebecca, standing at Gregory's side, felt the blood leave her face. Gregory didn't move. Is that the entirety of the message? One matter more, Your Majesty. The messenger's eyes flicked to Rebecca, something like satisfaction in them. Alpha Magnus has already secured Alpha Corvin of Redwater and Lord Barrick of the Northern Vale. Both stand ready to enforce the Accord's laws on pack property, should Camelot refuse. Pack property. Get out, Gregory said quietly. Before I forget, you carry a diplomat's immunity. The hall erupted the moment the messenger fled. Nobles who'd sneered at Rebecca weeks ago now murmured about treaty precedent, some almost pleased at the chaos. Others called for immediate war footing. Gregory silenced them with one raised hand. Rowan, muster the border garrisons. Quietly, for now. His voice had gone to ice. If Magnus wants to test whether the Accord protects a man who starves children over pack debts, I'll gladly educate him. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She kept seeing it. Young wolves who'd only ever shown her kindness, dying on some border field because Magnus wanted his bargaining chip back badly enough to burn 3 kingdoms reclaiming her. Ethan's letter sat on her nightstand. Months of healing, all of it paid for with a war she'd never asked anyone to fight. None of them deserved to die for her. By dawn, she'd decided, she would ride to Ashwood herself, before Camelot lost a single wolf. Surrender was a small enough price for no war at all. She made it as far as the stables. Going somewhere? Gregory's voice, low and dangerous from the shadows. Rebecca froze, one hand still on the saddle. I was going to leave a letter, she said. I didn't want you stopping me before I could explain. Explain now. Magnus wants me back. If I go to him willingly, there's no war, no wolves dying on a border because a king refused to hand over property that was never really his. Property. The word cracked like a whip. Is that what you think you are to me? It's what I am to everyone else. Magnus, the council, half your own court, who still whisper about an Omega wearing the king's favor. Her voice broke. I won't let people die defending a possession, Gregory. He crossed the distance in 3 strides. For a moment she thought he might shake her. Instead, his hands closed gently around her face, forcing her to look at him. You are never a possession. His voice shook with something raw. Not to Magnus, not to the council, not to me. 200 years I've ruled this kingdom, and I have never once asked another soul to sacrifice themselves for my throne. I will not start with you. Gregory, you are the first thing I have wanted for myself in 2 centuries. Not because fate chose you. His thumb brushed her cheek. Because you did. Every day since you woke in my chambers, you chose to stay a little longer. That's worth more to me than anything Magnus can wave in my face. I'm afraid, she whispered, of what happens if I stay, of what happens if I don't. Then be afraid with me, not away from me. The space between them had vanished again, the way it always did, when neither of them watched for it. This time, no knock came to interrupt. Gregory kissed her, like a man who'd waited 200 years and would have waited 200 more, achingly gentle, despite the restraint she could feel trembling beneath it. Rebecca's hands found the front of his coat, holding on like he was the only steady thing left in a world that kept trying to take people from her. When they finally broke apart, her forehead against his, neither moved to step back. Stay, Gregory murmured, not because of the bond, because you want to. I want to. She meant it more than she'd meant anything in years. 3 days later, Ashwood's answer arrived, not as a messenger, but as smoke on the southern horizon, visible from Camelot's highest towers. Rowan found Gregory on the battlements before the reports even reached him. Magnus burned the watchtower at Fallow Creek, my king. 6 wounded, 2 dead. His jaw was tight. Corvin's and Barrick's banners were seen riding beside his own. Gregory's eyes, fixed on the smoke, held no restraint left in them at all. Then he has his war. Below them, Camelot's horns began to sound, calling every wolf within its walls to arms. Camelot's gates thundered shut at dawn, and within the hour, Magnus's army broke across the northern fields like a wave, finally allowed to crash. Gregory rode at the front of his own warriors, golden eyes burning through the mist, his voice carrying over the horns and the drums. Hold the line. Let them break themselves against these walls. Rebecca watched from the healer's tent Celine had hastily raised near the inner courtyard, close enough to hear the war horns, close enough to smell the copper tang of blood, already carried on the wind. You should be in the keep, Celine said. Not for the first time, hands already busy binding a young warrior's torn arm. I'm not hiding while people bleed for me. Rebecca knelt beside the next wounded wolf carried in, pressing a cloth hard against a gash along his ribs. Tell me what to do. Celine studied her for one long moment, then nodded once, sharp and approving. Pressure. Steady. Don't let go until I say. The wounded came faster than either of them could keep pace with. Rebecca's hands turned red within the hour, her voice hoarse from murmuring reassurances to wolves twice her size, shaking and afraid beneath their armor. She didn't stop. Word spread through the ranks faster than any healer's remedy. The king's mate, elbow deep in blood beside them, refusing every order to retreat to safety. It did something to the wolves fighting beyond the walls. Rowan felt it himself, cutting down an Ashwood soldier at the gate, some fresh reserve of strength rising in men who'd expected to fight and die for a king's honor, and found themselves fighting instead for a queen who bled alongside them. By midday, the battle had turned savage. Magnus's forces pushed hard against the eastern wall, Corvin's banner rising beside his own, and for one terrible hour, it seemed the gate might not hold. Gregory fought like something out of the old wars he'd confessed to her. Relentless, merciless, every strike aimed at ending the battle faster, at keeping it away from the courtyard where Rebecca knelt over the wounded. A horn sounded, wrong and sudden, from behind the healer's tents. Enemy inside the walls, someone screamed. West breach. Rowan reached Rebecca first, shoving her behind him as 3 Ashwood wolves burst through a gap in the shattered west wall, blades already drawn. Get her to the keep, Rowan snarled to the nearest guard, already moving to meet the attackers head-on. He took the first blade meant for her. It caught him across the side, deep enough that he staggered, blood soaking fast through his armor. He didn't fall. He drove his own sword through the wolf who'd struck him, and turned to face the second, already slowing, already failing. Rebecca didn't think. She grabbed a fallen blade from the ground and threw herself between Rowan and the third attacker, screaming loud enough to draw eyes from 20 feet away. The wolf hesitated, just long enough. Gregory arrived like a storm breaking. He tore through the remaining attackers with a fury that left nothing standing, and when the last one fell, the courtyard went suddenly, terribly quiet, except for Rowan's ragged breathing. Rowan! Rebecca dropped to her knees beside him, hands already pressing against the wound, refusing to let this be the moment she lost someone else. Careless, Rowan managed, blood on his teeth. Throwing yourself at an armed wolf, my lady. Shut up and hold still. Celine reached them seconds later, and between the two of them, they staunched the bleeding enough to buy time. Enough, barely, for Rowan to survive what should have killed him. Gregory knelt across from her, breathing hard, his eyes finding hers over Rowan's failing body. You could have died. So could he. For me. Her hands didn't stop working. I wasn't going to let that be for nothing. By the time the sun began sinking behind Camelot's broken west wall, Magnus's army had broken with it. Gregory's warriors pushed the remaining forces back through the fields. Corvin's banner falling first, then Barrick's. Both alphas apparently deciding Magnus's cause wasn't worth their own deaths. Magnus himself fled the field on horseback, disappearing into the tree line before Gregory could reach him, leaving nothing behind but scattered dead and a battlefield finally gone quiet. Camelot had held. Rebecca allowed herself exactly one breath of relief, kneeling in the bloodied courtyard beside Rowan's stabilized unconscious form, Gregory's hand finding her shoulder, like he needed to confirm she was real. Then a healer came running from the inner keep, face white, voice breaking before she'd even reached them. "My king, my lady." She could barely get the words out. "The boy, Ethan, he's gone." Rebecca's whole body went cold. Gone where? During the breach, while the guards were pulled to the wall, the healer's hands shook. "There's a message, left in his bed." Gregory took the scrap of parchment himself, and Rebecca watched his face change as he read it. Watched 200 years of careful restraint disappear entirely from his eyes. He turned the parchment toward her without a word. Magnus's seal, Magnus's handwriting, hurried and triumphant. "You took what was mine. Now I've taken what's yours. Come alone, or the boy dies exactly as I once let him." Rebecca's knees gave out. The war hadn't ended at all. It had simply found a crueler battlefield. Gregory had war maps spread across his desk within minutes, voice clipped and controlled, in a way that frightened Rebecca more than shouting would have. "Magnus's fortress sits 2 days' hard ride south. If we move fast, with a small enough party to avoid notice. I'm coming. Rebecca." "He took Ethan because of me." Her voice shook, but she didn't back down. "I'm not hiding in this castle while my brother is alone with that man again." Gregory's jaw tightened. He didn't argue further. They rode within the hour. Gregory, Rowan pale but upright, and refusing to be left behind, and a dozen of Camelot's most trusted warriors, moving fast and quiet through back roads Magnus wouldn't think to watch. Rebecca said little during the ride. Guilt sat heavy in her chest, relentless. "This is my fault," she finally said, somewhere in the dark of the second night, when the fire had burned low and Gregory was the only one still awake beside her. "If I'd never come to Camelot, Ethan would already be dead," Gregory said quietly. "Magnus would have found some other excuse to hurt you both eventually. Cruelty like his doesn't need a reason. It only needs an opportunity. You don't know that. I know men like him. 200 years taught me exactly what they are." He took her hand, steady despite the fury still simmering beneath his calm. "This is Magnus's fault, only his. Don't let him steal your guilt on top of everything else he's already taken." They reached Ashwood's fortress the following dusk, slipping through a poorly guarded eastern wall Rowan had scouted himself, weakened enough by the earlier war to leave gaps Magnus hadn't yet repaired. They found Ethan first, locked in a storage cellar, frightened but unharmed, and the sound Rebecca made when she pulled her brother into her arms undid something in Gregory's chest he didn't have words for. Then Magnus found them. He stood in the cellar doorway, flanked by only 2 guards, smiling like a man who'd expected exactly this outcome. "Rebecca, look how far you've climbed." His eyes swept over her, over Gregory's murderous stillness beside her. Alpha King's mate. Who would have thought a starving Omega could rise so high? "Why?" Rebecca said, holding Ethan tighter. "Why deny him medicine? Why do any of this?" Magnus's smile didn't waver. "You were always going to be useful eventually. I simply needed you desperate enough to remember it." His eyes flicked over her again, slower this time, uglier. "A dying brother makes a girl very obedient. I imagined you'd come begging to my bed, long before you ever reached the hell. I never expected you'd stumble into a king's arms instead." The cellar went silent. Rebecca felt something cold and clear settle over her, past the horror, past the years of unexplained cruelty, finally making a sickening kind of sense. Gregory moved before she could speak again. He had Magnus by the throat against the stone wall in a single motion, claws extending, a sound tearing out of his chest that wasn't remotely human. "You starved a child," Gregory snarled, "to break his sister into your bed. Gregory, don't." Rebecca's voice cut through his fury, sharp and sudden. "Don't kill him. He deserves worse than death. He deserves justice, real justice. Judged before every pack who ever feared him, exposed for exactly what he is, not martyred by a king's temper in a cellar where no one will ever know the truth." She stepped closer, laying a hand on his rigid arm. "Let the world see him for what he did. Don't give him the mercy of a quick end." Gregory's claws remained at Magnus's throat for one long, terrible moment. Then, slowly, he released him, letting Magnus crumple gasping to the floor. "You'll stand before the great accord," Gregory said, voice like iron. "Every alpha who lent you their banner will hear exactly what you did to a dying child, and the sister who tried to save him. You'll lose your pack, your title, and whatever scraps of respect you still imagine you're owed." Magnus's guards didn't fight when Camelot's warriors bound him. They rode home with Ethan wrapped in Gregory's own cloak, exhausted and safe, chattering within an hour about wolves and swords despite everything he'd survived. That night, back within Camelot's walls, Gregory found Rebecca on the same balcony where she'd first watched his kingdom from a distance, uncertain if she'd ever belonged to it. "He's asleep," she said, before Gregory could ask. "Celine's watching him. You saved him, twice now." Gregory came to stand beside her. "I've never seen strength like yours, Rebecca. Not in 200 years of warriors." The mate bond hummed steady between them now, warmer than it had ever been, settled instead of desperate. "Stay," Gregory said quietly. "Not for 3 months. Forever. Be my queen. Let me spend however many years I have left, proving you were never a bargain I struck, but the best thing that ever happened to this kingdom." Rebecca's eyes filled, her heart aching with everything she finally allowed herself to want. "Give me one more day," she whispered. "Not because I doubt it, because for the first time in my life, the choice is actually mine to make slowly, and I want to feel that before I answer." Gregory pressed a kiss to her forehead, patient in a way the old rumors never could have predicted. "Take all the time you need," he murmured. "I've already waited 200 years. One more day changes nothing." The morning the 3 months ended, Gregory did not summon Rebecca to his throne room. He came to her chambers instead, dressed simply, none of the ceremony a king might use to make a moment feel smaller than it was. In his hands he carried a traveling cloak, warm and well-made, folded with the same careful attention he gave everything that mattered to him. "I told the stables to prepare a horse," he said. "An escort, if you want one. Enough coin that you and Ethan never worry for anything again, wherever you choose to settle. You're just going to let me go. I promised you a choice. A king who breaks his own oath the moment it costs him something isn't worth the crown he wears." His voice stayed steady, though something behind his eyes had gone carefully controlled, the way it had the night he'd told her about Thornwake. "I love you enough to mean it, even now." Rebecca looked at the cloak in his hands, at the door standing open behind him, at freedom offered without a single condition attached. She had come to Camelot a girl who believed her only worth was what she could sacrifice. She was leaving that girl behind somewhere in Hell Forest, in a cellar in Ashwood, in every moment since when someone had finally asked what she wanted, instead of simply taking it. "I'm not leaving," she said. Gregory went very still. "Rebecca, I didn't fall in love with my alpha." She crossed the space between them and set the cloak aside, the way she was setting aside every excuse either of them had ever had for staying apart. "I fell in love with the man who never once treated me like property. Not the bond, not fate. You, only you." Something broke open across his face. 200 years of restraint finally giving way entirely. He knelt, not the reverse, not the traditional bow of an Omega before her alpha, but the King of Camelot on one knee before her, hands closing gently around hers. "Then be my queen," he said. "Not my possession, my equal, in every law I write from this day forward. Rule beside me, Rebecca Ashwood, for however many years fate is generous enough to give us." "Yes." She was laughing and crying at once. "Yes, Gregory." He rose and kissed her like a vow, and this time nothing interrupted them at all. Months passed, and Camelot transformed with them. Ethan grew loud and healthy in the palace halls, terrorizing the training yard with a wooden sword Gregory had commissioned himself, grinning as he declared every warrior who let him win the weakest wolf in Camelot. Rebecca, newly crowned, spent her mornings in council chambers rather than idle luxury, rewriting the laws that had let Omegas be starved, sold, and silenced for generations. Gregory signed every reform without hesitation, abolishing the pack customs that had once let a man like Magnus decide a child's worth by his blood status alone. Rowan, fully healed and fiercer than ever, was named Commander of the Royal Guard, wearing the scar at his side, like a medal he refused to have treated as one. Magnus's trial before the Great Accord stripped him of his title entirely. Ashwood Pack was absorbed peacefully under new leadership loyal to the reforms, and neither Corvin nor Barrick dared oppose Camelot a second time. Word of the king's justice, and the queen who tempered it, spread through every border pack, until old rivalries softened, one by one, into something close to peace. On the night of the autumn moon, Rebecca came to Gregory's chambers without being summoned. "I'm ready," she said quietly, "for all of it, the bond, completely." Gregory searched her face, looking for any trace of the desperate girl who'd once offered her life to save her brother, needing to be certain this was choice, and only choice. He found none of that girl left, only Rebecca, steady, sovereign, entirely his because she wanted to be. "You're certain." "I have never been more certain of anything." She reached for him. "I didn't come to you seeking death anymore. I'm choosing a life, with you." What followed was tender in a way 2 centuries of loneliness had never let him imagine. Not claimed, not taken, but given freely, completely, until the bond between them settled into something unbreakable and whole. Later, they stood together on the balcony overlooking the kingdom, the same place she'd once asked him for one more day. Below them, wolves from every rank gathered under Camelot's banner, warriors and servants, nobles and refugees from packs once too poor to matter. Ethan's laughter drifting up from the courtyard, where Rowan was teaching him to properly hold a blade. The kingdom that had once feared its alpha now knelt willingly for both its king and queen. Not from fear, but because it had watched them turn justice into compassion, and power into protection, for those who'd never had anyone protect them before. "No regrets?" Gregory asked, his hand finding hers on the rail. Rebecca leaned into him, watching her brother's laughter rise from below, watching a kingdom finally worthy of the man who ruled it. "None," she said. "Just the beginning of everything.